Okay, our next speaker is Joe Cohen, and he's the owner and main writer at selfhacked.com. Since upgrading or biohacking himself, Joe has become an investor and entrepreneur in founding Self-Decode, Self-Hacked, and Self-Hacked Store. We're living in a self-hacked world. Jeez. Okay. So he's helped a lot of people. He's worked with a lot of people. He himself will give you a little explanation about who he is and what he's done. Here's Joe Cohen.
Hello, everybody. All right, so first of all, who am I? I am the CEO, head researcher, and head writer at selfhack.com. The website gets over 400,000 hits a month. Right now we have 339 posts and about 20,000 citations. I've dealt with over 800 clients. I am also the CEO of selfdecode.com. Self-Decode is an application. The goal is self-hacked. I want to create content for people to be able to become optimal and heal themselves. With Self-Decode, I want to give them the tools from which they can apply information and they can see which information is applicable to them. Because right now there's just a jungle of information and it's hard for people to know what applies to me, what's most important for me, or what's least important for me. So I feel that that's a critical component of the ecosystem. Selfdecode.com has over 700 curated snips and about 4,000 citations. So that's a pretty decent-sized website in itself. The reason I got into this field was because I had a myriad of health conditions, and none of them nobody was able to diagnose them. And when I was reading information from different blogs or wherever, I noticed that people were just providing the information that helped them, but not explaining why people are different, right? So why does one person do better with one diet versus another diet? Unless you make the claim that people don't really know what they're experiencing, and I'm really telling them, this is really the best. They tried that, they felt good. Not really. Try this diet. It's the best one for you. So I was of the opinion that there is a large variation in how people do with different diets or different lifestyle factors, and I wanted to know what were the underlying mechanisms. How can I differentiate between one kind of issue with another kind of issue? So at the age of 25, that's when I had a serious health meltdown, and that's when I really took things up another notch. My goal is to, again, give people information that I didn't have and that I wish I would have had, and that people can apply to their own issues. Not only, my goal is not to say this worked for me, see if it'll work for you, even though I think that's not too bad. Try it out but I think understanding how things are working and trying to, have everyone, give people tailored advice, I think is important. So this talk is for anyone who's chronically ill, anyone who's trying to optimize for performance, anyone who's trying to increase their longevity. Or if you're a physician and you're trying to help your own clients, you can use my framework that I use with my clients. I'm gonna give you the framework that I use in my consults. I have something that I call the Big 8. These are the Big 8 factors that cause disease or non-optimal health. These are my Big 8. And I think what's really important here is emphasis, right? So I think everybody in this room has probably heard of all of these things, right? But I don't think that everybody has the right emphasis. And I think one thing, things should be emphasized according to how important they are. Now, even with this big 8, I think some people require, some people do better with, some people it's more important, let's say number 8 or number 1 or number 5, but I think this is a good framework in which to tackle or self-hack your issues. So as far as diet, the question is, how did we evolve? I mean, I don't want to make necessarily the paleo argument, but I just think some things would be interesting to note. So, we were we were closer to the equator. We also generally were close to water sources, and seafood was, a common aspect of diets throughout history. It's important to note that before the 1600s, we really didn't have American foods. That includes coffee, squash, corn, nuts, seeds, goji, cacao, etc. We didn't have sugar, refined foods. Wheat was harvested differently, and it wasn't around before 10,000 years ago. Grains were not eaten before 10,000 years ago. Veganism is a new thing, and we ate a lot of vegetables, and fruit was eaten in season. So I'm not going to say that everybody is going to do better on paleo. That's actually what I'm going to get to. When it comes to diet, I think it's important to note that there's two main diets that people are going to respond well to. And that depends on whether which part of the scale you're on. In the research, there's a phenomenon that is known as a cancer autoimmune trade-off. I mean, if you're having chronic inflammation, you're going to be at elevated risk for possibly both. But in general, people are either disposed to autoimmunity or cancer or other diseases, but those are the two big ones. Heart disease is probably more in the autoimmune section, but that's just in general from chronic inflammation. So I think when we ask ourselves, what diet are we going to respond well to? We need to see what category we're in. Are we in the autoimmune category, or are we in the cancer category? And here are just some mechanisms of these categories. You probably are not familiar with too many of these, but I'll just breeze through them. Th1, Th17 versus Th2. These are the arms of these are two arms of the immune system that researchers have found were they found two main phenotypes. Generally, it's really Th1 versus Th2. Later on, they came out with Th17, and with these phenotypes, I'll go through later what Th1 is. How do you know if you're Th1 or Th2? But as you see, here's the antigen-presenting cells. These are the precursor cells, and they're kind of like a blank slate, if you will. And they can turn into either Th17, Th1, Th2, and T regulatory cells. We want them to turn into the T regulatory cells, but based on your genetics and other factors, they can turn into either Th1 or Th2. I'll get to that a little later. High versus low PPAR gamma. That might be a little too technical, but you know what? I'll explain the Th1 and Th2 a bit more. So let's go to the Th1. Th1 conditions. Th1 people are more likely to be thin. Rheumatoid arthritis is a Th1 condition. Hashimoto's, low T3 syndrome. More often than not, I guess some Th2 people can have that as well. IBD, Crohn's, psoriasis, celiac, type 1 diabetes, PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, lupus, and multiple sclerosis. You'll see that some are also Th2, so you can be Th1 and Th2 dominant, but basically these are all Th1 conditions. And the Th2 conditions are going to be IgE-related allergies, seasonal allergies, airway constriction, asthma, nasal drips, eczema, hay fever, increased stomach acidity or GERD, excess histamine, hives, chronic fatigue syndrome, it's a little nebulous, but more often Th2, uveitis, Graves' disease, Sjogren's, and oral lichen planus. These are Th2 conditions. Now, if you're having chronic inflammatory issues, you might notice you're either in Th1 or Th2. What I see is, and the research notices this as well, people who have weight issues, we're getting back to PPAR gamma. PPAR gamma is a transcription factor, which means it's a protein that goes into the nucleus and makes different other proteins. So PPAR gamma is an anti-inflammatory transcription factor. It causes the immune system to go to Th2. Th2 is actually an anti-inflammatory immune system. That's people who have Th2 are more immunodeficient. They're better off with immunostimulants. And PPAR gamma is something that is an anti-inflammatory protein. It suppresses the immune system. It creates Th2 cells. Now, people vary in their levels of PPAR gamma. If you are a high PPAR gamma person, then you will be more Th2. If you're a low PPAR gamma person, you'll be more likely Th1. So that's one thing, right? Then high versus low STAT3. And by the way, everything that I'm mentioning here has a genetic component. There are PPAR gamma genes that we look at on our program. There's STAT3 genes that we look at on our program, self-decode. But even without that, it's important to realize that these things, whether we can identify the genes or not, this is a very serious component in the Th1 and Th2 balance. Now, what's interesting about PPAR gamma is it causes weight gain. It creates fat cells. So what we see is, I'll try to paint you a picture here. What we have is PPAR gamma causing a suppression of the immune system, increasing weight, and having so what the research notices is that generally people with allergies, right, Th2, they're more likely to be overweight. And so these people are probably more likely higher PPAR gamma. STAT3 is another transcription factor. High STAT3 is going to be Th1. Low STAT3 is going to be something else, either Th2 or whatever. Now, if you're high STAT3, you're going to be thin. If you're low STAT3, you're going to more likely have leptin resistance and be overweight. So, okay, I hope I'm not going too much over the heads of people here, and I can just go quicker in the technical parts. Another thing is high versus low leptin, right? So people who are overweight produce more leptin. And what I noticed is people who are more overweight have higher white blood cells, red blood cells, and possibly VEGF. And leptin produces these things. Leptin also produces thyroid hormones. And in the people with low leptin, the clients that I have who are thin, low leptin, they generally have low white blood cells and low T3. Okay, so cannabinoids. I'm going to go a little quicker through these. High versus low cannabinoids. I have a gene that causes my cannabinoid receptors not to work as well. So I'm homozygous for the minor alleles, and being homozygous for these minor alleles causes gut inflammation, an elevated, anxiety. It can cause, a variety of issues that I've noticed are associated with people, Th1 dominant. And so cannabinoids actually activate the Th2 system. They're an anti-inflammatory pathway. If they're not working as well, you're going to be more likely to have food sensitivities. And again, the reason I'm bringing this up is because whether you have high or low cannabinoids is going to determine what diet is right for you. If your cannabinoid receptors are not working very well, that means you're probably going to do better with a diet that has less components that can activate your immune system, because you're not going to be able to shut it down as well. Same with the PPAR gamma, same with the STAT3. And adiponectin, we get to adiponectin. Adiponectin is actually usually known as a good hormone. It causes weight loss, AMPK activation, and a variety of other positive effects. So people who are prone to being overweight would love to have more adiponectin. But people who are thin, on the other hand, I've noticed have higher adiponectin, and that's actually, the research says that if you're thin, you're going to, thin people have higher adiponectin. But the interesting thing is that adiponectin is actually correlated with autoimmune diseases. So what we see here is another trade-off. If you're going to have cancer, or you're afraid of cancer, you're probably better off with higher adiponectin. If you're more afraid of autoimmune disease, you're probably better off with not as high adiponectin. Now, high versus low insulin and IGF-1. IGF-1, this is actually prototypical for the cancer autoimmune trade-off. IGF-1 is a growth hormone that causes growth of cancer cells and tumors, right? And so, there is a big discussion. The vegans will say we need to lower IGF-1 because to increase longevity. Problem is, in humans, that doesn't really work the same way. We need IGF-1 to grow our brain cells, to perform, to exercise, to feel optimal. IGF-1 is also an anti-inflammatory in a lot of ways and can be beneficial for some people with autoimmunity. So if you have cancer or you're afraid of cancer, you're probably better off with having lower IGF-1. If you're predisposed to autoimmunity, you're probably better off having higher IGF-1. And there are genes for IGF-1 as well. I have a gene in the IGF-1 receptor that causes it not to work as well. Now, actually, that gene is associated with longevity in certain conditions. So we need to keep in mind that IGF-1 can increase longevity, but it can also, if you have low levels, it can cause problems. Natural killer cells and activities. These are really good, natural killer cells, right? If you have too high levels, it can cause problems in autoimmunity, but they destroy cancer. So what I want you to get out of this is that there's a lot of these things can, there's a trade-off with cancer and autoimmunity. There are some benefits with having the genes for being overweight. You're more likely to have those anti-inflammatory genes. Not always, but more likely. And I notice I have to recommend very different things to the people who are thin and have Th1 and chronic inflammation. Now, the Th2 can also have chronic inflammation. I don't want to say that they don't, but it's a different kind of inflammation. And they do well with different diets. Maybe not, the Th1 and Th2 often do well with similar diets, but the cancer versus autoimmune definitely do well with different diets. The Th1 versus Th2 do well with a different set of supplements. Folate. I am homozygous for the MTHFR mutation, which about 10% of, the famous one, which about 10% of the population has. And somebody asked me on my blog, why is there this mutation even? What's the point of it? And I said, I was thinking, that's a good question. I looked it up. And it turns out that if you do research on folate, it can cause cancer, right? But people who have low folate, which the MTHFR mutation causes, that can cause a whole bunch of other problems. So there's, and generally, the problems that I see, the clients that I get, they're having these, the amount of people who have these MTHFR mutations is much higher than the general population. So I would consider them as part of the autoimmune category, even though they don't have necessarily an autoimmune condition. I never had an autoimmune condition, but I had issues that were, there were predisposing factors to an autoimmune condition. Probably it was a matter of time before I would get one. So I would count the people who are just having chronic inflammatory issues, noticeable, not necessarily, everybody thinks they might have chronic inflammation. But I'll give a bunch of symptoms later on. And as far as amino acids, the other speaker spoke about them. And, we see all this research about methionine restriction, longevity, and all that kind of stuff. And there's a bunch of amino acids that when they restrict, it can increase longevity. Leucine, there's really a whole bunch of them, tryptophan even. And when you restrict these amino acids, they decrease IGF-1. The other thing about methionine restriction is, I did some research, because somebody brought it up once, and it turns out that certain autoimmune conditions, like lupus, do worse with less methionine, right? So it really depends when you're thinking about, should I do methionine restriction? Do I do a low-protein diet, high-protein diet? I think it's a good idea to say, are you in the cancer group or the pre-cancer group or the person who you had a parent or grandparent who had cancer and you're afraid of that? Or are you in the autoimmune group? And generally there is a genetic component to these things, and one of your parents will have it. So, one of my parents has these autoimmune types of issues. And so you really need to see, are you in the cancer or autoimmune group? And if you're in the autoimmune group or the chronic inflammation group, you want to see if you're Th1 or Th2. Okay, so these are the Th1, the Th2. All right, now the diet. I'm going to go through some dietary factors that, and I have in parentheses here, what's not good for what. So lectins, tannins, amines, FODMAPs. I didn't include it. Plant immunostimulants in general. There's a whole bunch of them. There's people who complain about oxalates. There's people who complain about everything under the sun. This food gives them inflammation. That food gives them inflammation. But lectins, tannins, and amines are general categories of substances that stimulate the immune system. And these are found in grains, beans, nuts, seeds. And that's where a paleo diet comes in. Not enough water. That's something that I see very few people keeping to, drinking enough water. Water, 2/3 of our body is made out of water. And that's probably on par with diet or close to it. People don't focus on it. So not good for either cancer or autoimmune. Too many carbs, especially refined carb sugar. Everybody knows about this, right? Not good for either cancer or autoimmune. So people with chronic inflammatory issues will often not do well with carbs, the autoimmune group, and people with cancer will say, cancer cells feed on carbs, yada, yada. But not good for both. And that's why it's villainized. Nobody's doing well with a high sugar diet. Not enough DHA. DHA is critical for cancer or autoimmunity. It's just one of those things that if you Google DHA in any condition, there will probably be a research paper on it. It's beneficial to almost everything. And again, this comes back to we've always included seafood in our diets or sources of DHA. So grass-fed meat is going to have some DHA, not nearly the amount of seafood. Allergens. This is going to apply to people with autoimmunity. Gluten, dairy, casein, whey, beta-lactoglobulin. These are proteins in dairy. And so there's a lot of people who will say dairy is terrible. For me, it is terrible. And for anyone with Th1 or Th2 dominance, you got to stay away from dairy. These are the proteins in dairy that cause problems. It's the casein, sometimes the whey, sometimes beta-lactoglobulin. Gluten can also cause problems in people, but I think I would emphasize it less than it's emphasized these days. I would categorize them as allergens, proteins in food that are capable of causing an immune imbalance. And these are generally not good for the people in the autoimmune group. People in the cancer group, I'd say, eat gluten. You're fine. Okay, eggs. Researchers use ovalbumin in animal studies to invoke allergies. This is a protein in eggs that can cause inflammation, Th2 especially. Soy, wheat, peanuts, tree nuts, not good for autoimmune. Not enough protein. This is good for cancer, not for autoimmune. So if you're predisposed to autoimmune conditions, you want to eat a high protein diet. If you're predisposed to cancer, you're probably better off with a low protein diet. Not enough micronutrients. That's another problem in the diet. These are some nutrients that we're deficient in often. Vitamin D, iodine, if you don't eat iodized salt or seaweed. Vitamin D if you're not getting enough sun. Zinc if you're not eating enough animal foods. And people with autoimmune type issues generally are lacking in zinc, especially because the people with these kinds of issues often have gut inflammation. And if you have gut inflammation, you're not going to absorb zinc very well. Zinc or iron. It's not a coincidence that most of my clients are low in ferritin. Ferritin is a measure of iron status. And almost all my clients, and they're attracted to me because I speak about the issues that involve them, which are these autoimmune chronic inflammatory issues. So iron and zinc, iron is, if you're low in ferritin, that's a good measure if you're probably low in other minerals as well. Potassium, most people don't get enough potassium in their diet. Calcium, especially if you're not eating dairy, which I don't advise in the autoimmune group, you're not getting enough calcium. B vitamins, K2, vitamin A, vitamin C, right? So these are some nutrients that, this is one of the aspects of diet that's unhealthy in people's diet. They're not getting enough micronutrients. Excess calories, right? So we hear about calorie restriction. Excess calories are not good for cancer or autoimmune disease. Now, calorie restriction is a different topic, but I'm talking about people who are, the average American is going to eat like 3,900 calories. If you're eating a healthier diet, you're probably not eating that much. But there's thousands, tens of thousands of papers on excess calories causing cellular stress. Not enough fiber or phytochemicals. That's another problem in the diet. Food additives, amines, sulfur oxalates, not good for some autoimmune. So those are some things in the diet that people want to pay attention to, and I let you know which one you should pay attention to depending on which category you're in. So like I said, people with autoimmune issues do better with a paleo diet, generally. I interviewed a guy, Dr. Gundry, very smart guy. The reason I interviewed him was because I saw he did a study on people with autoimmune conditions, and I was researching lectins. I said, there's a common denominator in foods that I react to. They all have lectins. So I was doing research on that, and I found this researcher, Dr. Stephen Gundry. He did a study on 800 people with autoimmune conditions who ate a diet that consisted of basically a paleo diet, avoidance of grains, sprouted grains, pseudograins, beans, legumes, soy, peanuts, cashews, nightshades, melons, and squashes, and non-Southern European cow milk products. He actually allows some dairy products, which I don't necessarily agree with, and grain or bean-fed animals. Okay, so most of these people had elevated TNF-alpha. That's a cytokine. It's a marker of inflammation. After 6 months, he noticed a normalization of TNF-alpha in all patients who complied with the diet. Now, 800 people is a lot of people. What he concluded was that elevated adiponectin is a marker for lectin and gluten sensitivity, while TNF-alpha can be used as a marker for lectin exposure in sensitive individuals. So the takeaway from this diet is if you have chronic inflammatory or autoimmune issues, you want to be on a kind of paleo diet. I have my own version, which I call the lectin avoidance diet, which is basically like a more restrictive paleo diet, and it's for people who, if you've tried a paleo diet and you're still getting inflammation, try that. All right. Now, what do the cancer people do? And I'm sorry if I'd rather not call the cancer people the autoimmune people. But people who are predisposed to cancer should be following a Mediterranean type of diet. These kinds of people, again, you're not going to notice any acute reactions to food. It's just going to be the autoimmune people like me. I eat a food and I'm like, whoa, if something's in it that doesn't sit right with me, I'll feel it. And it'll cause brain fog, whatever, a whole bunch of issues. Now, I would like to say that some people who get inflammation from a food, it's restricted to a certain place. If you have Hashimoto's, it can be restricted to your thyroid. And so some of these people don't necessarily notice an acute effect from food. For me, it focuses on my hypothalamus, which is important for wakefulness, a bunch of cognitive effects. Now, this is a slide for people with chronic inflammation, autoimmunity. What are some risk factors for food sensitivities? This is what I've noticed in my clients. This is what makes sense in the research. Psychological stress. About 80% of my clients had chronic inflammation, whether from food or some other thing, after psychological stress. An acute bout or a long bout. Marathons and excess exercise. I get clients who tell me their issues started after, running marathons. And again, these things, if you have psychological stress, it's going to cause release of a hormone called CRH. CRH is a hormone that basically causes leaky gut. There are other factors involved, but basically your gut gets leaky, and then your immune system starts attacking various food substances. Vegan or vegetarian diet. I'll get people who were on a vegan or vegetarian diet for a while, and the problem is that it's lower in vitamin A, DHA, and vitamin D. Those are the 3 key nutrients that you need for immune tolerance in the gut. They increase the T regulatory cells of the gut, and they create tolerance to proteins. Now, if you are on a vegan diet, even if you're more of the cancer type, right, sometimes it can cause problems if you do it for long enough. You're going to be deficient in nutrients and the 3 that I mentioned, and the way these things work is there's a certain load that your system can take, and if you start becoming sensitive, your tolerance goes down. So I used to be more tolerant, but once I got sensitive, I became much less tolerant. So once people are on a vegan and vegetarian diet for a long time, they're eating a whole bunch of these foods, and especially if they combine it with stress, chronic inflammation, or some kind of chronic injury, marathon, it can cause these food problems. Next, chronic circadian disruptions. A lot of this talk is going to be about that, so I'll save that for later. But the bottom line is it imbalances the gut immune system. We'll see an animal study that said it increases the Th17 cells of the gut, which cause inflammation, and instead of getting the T regulatory cells, you're getting those Th17 cells. Sleep deprivation will disturb your immune system, and antibiotics, which will disturb your gut flora. Some people will say some pesticides like Roundup. Whatever the case is, disturbing your gut flora or causing some kind of inflammation in your gut is going to increase your risk for food sensitivities, and by not having enough of certain nutrients, you're at an elevated risk for that. Mechanisms for inflammation. Here's some mechanisms. I can go through this a little faster. Less blood flow to your gut. when you're stressed, you're not getting enough blood flow. If you have an injury, again, when you're stressed, it's going to your heart. It's not going to your gut. Leptin is a hormone that also increases inflammation. And actually what a researcher found that I interviewed, that the most significant marker in chronic fatigue syndrome of fatigue, they measured fatigue and leptin levels. The most significant factor was leptin. When leptin rose, fatigue rose. And that's because in an inflammatory state, leptin can increase inflammation, and inflammation increases fatigue. Inflammation, TLR, toll-like receptor activation, cytokines, transcription factors, NF-kappa beta. TLR activation is a feature of IBS, MHC1, MHC2, lower methylation, lower cannabinoid, lower PPAR gamma, higher STAT3, lower NAD+, and SIRT1. Lower T regulatory cells, microbiome imbalance, lower growth factors. There was somebody who told me that their food sensitivities went away when they started taking growth hormone, or it diminished greatly. I haven't found that for me, but these growth factors can increase the growth rate of your intestinal cells and allow them to repair faster. Lower serotonin. If you have lower serotonin, in a lot of the clients I get, in a case of chronic inflammation or chronic stress, they're going to have lower serotonin. Why? Cortisol and inflammation causes tryptophan to get shunted into kynurenine instead of serotonin. Kynurenine basically causes anxiety, and serotonin will reduce anxiety. So these people have low serotonin, high kynurenine, but serotonin, most of the serotonin that we have is actually produced in the gut. So it's critical that we have enough serotonin for gut function. Next. If you want to know if you're somebody who has the symptoms of food sensitivities, right? Do I have problems with food sensitivities or not? Can you eat gluten or not? The answer is like this. If you have enough of these symptoms, you should stay away from, you should eat a paleo diet or a lectin avoidance diet. If you have gut problems, IBS, IBD, bloating, autoimmune conditions, fatigue in the day, brain fog, low or high BMI. A lot of the clients I get have a problem actually gaining weight. And we discussed, there's different mechanisms for that. Cold intolerance, low blood pressure, low or high heart rate. This will depend on the individual. So again, the Th2 people, I notice, and just maybe to give you a more concrete impression of what Th2 is, you guys know Dave Asprey? He's Th2, right? So a lot of his recommendations are going to be based on Th2. Now, Th2 will more likely, he actually had a problem with weight. He was overweight. Again, Th2. I bet when he ate something, his heart rate went up probably, that he was sensitive to. When I eat something, I generally have a lower heart rate. And a lot of my Th1 clients have lower heart rates. And especially, so my heart rate normalizes once I'm on a diet for a while, but generally it's a lower heart rate. Immune imbalances, if you see the Th1 and Th2 list and you're on either list, that means you have an immune imbalance. Excessive anxiety, perfectionism, procrastination, paranoia, OCD, and inability to let go of thoughts. Now, some people might have one of these, but again, you have to have enough of these symptoms for you to conclusively say or have a good idea that you're having food sensitivity issues. Skin problems. The skin is a point where it's one of those things that if your immune system is imbalanced, it'll be one of the first things that shows up. So eczema or psoriasis, not handling glucose or carbs well. A lot of people get hypoglycemic from carbs. And by the way, I actually had all of these symptoms. So, and most of my clients have a lot of these symptoms too. Generally, almost all of them. So some kind of joint discomfort, pain in random places, water retention, puffiness around the eyes, some types of headaches and migraines, sleep and circadian issues such as insomnia, postnasal drip, tonsillitis, Th1 or Th2 dominant. So if you have enough of these, you probably have a food sensitivity. To give you a rough figure, probably like 70 to 80% of these symptoms. Inflammation from your diet. This is what it causes. It caused me, and it caused a lot of my clients. Almost all of them. People have sleep issues, circadian issues, stress, overactive nervous system, and a higher susceptibility to toxic and infectious issues. When you have a leaky gut, things can stream in easier. And nutrient deficiencies, so zinc, iron, a whole bunch of minerals are not going to be as absorbed as well. So to conclude with the diet, for those predisposed to cancer, Mediterranean diet. For those if you don't have symptoms of food intolerances. For those predisposed to autoimmunity, lectin avoidance diet, paleo diet, whatever. Seafood, other fresh fish, beef, chicken, organ meats. Honey is generally good. Oils and fats, sweet potatoes are generally more benign. Fruits and veggies are generally more benign. For the super sensitive, such as myself, we discussed trehalose before. That is, I take that as a sugar because it's more refined. Anything more refined is going to be lacking in the immunostimulants. So high maize is a source of resistant starch, which is its own topic. But basically, that's whether you're predisposed to cancer or autoimmunity, resistant starch, which produces butyrate, is very good for you. I'll eat cricket flour, hemp protein, or beef protein. Pressure cooking reduces the lectins. Proline-rich polypeptides reduces tannins. And I use a device called ISIS on my gut if I do react to a food. And then these are some other molecules, glucosamine, sialic acid, and acetylglucosamine, mannose. These are sugar-binding molecules, lectin-binding molecules. But generally, I don't recommend them if, maybe just as if you're going to eat a food anyway. This is a big topic, circadian rhythms. So I would actually be interested in hearing some people in the audience what some people thought of as the big factors in health. What do you guys think of as the big factors in health? Stress.
Go ahead. Just repeat it. Yeah. Okay. How about metabolic rate?
Okay. Metabolic rate? All right, fine. So we'll continue. Many bodily processes. What is a circadian rhythm? A circadian rhythm is the body, to work efficiently, things need to work in concert with each other, like a symphony. It needs to work at the right time for the right thing that we want. So in the morning, we want insulin for calories. And so there's a whole bunch of processes that go into making insulin. We want it to be stored in our muscles so that we use it instead of our fat cells. So in order for things to run better, we want to we want our system to run on a certain rhythm. These processes have a certain rhythm or flow. Okay, the body produces a rhythm. These rhythms can be adjusted or entrained to the local environment by external cues called Zeitgebers, which include light, temperature, and redox cycles. Now, early research into circadian rhythms, they thought that most people preferred a 25-hour day. Why? Because they gave them light at night, and light delays your cycle. So what this means in practice is that if you woke up on 6 a.m. one day, the next day you're going to wake up at 7 a.m. You're also going to go to sleep an hour later. And a lot of people probably notice that. If you just if you didn't have to wake up in the morning and you had light at night, you're going to keep pushing your rhythm more and more. Actually, two of the people I'm living with, they both went the whole other way. They kept on staying up so that they can completely go to the next cycle, which is interesting. So, but that's actually relatively normal if you're getting light at night. A more stringent study by Harvard found that the rhythm is closer to 24 hours and 11 minutes. This is still longer than the solar day, so it might not be a big difference, but if we keep on allowing 15 minutes extra each day, we go to sleep 15 minutes later, wake up 15 minutes later, it'll add up over a while, and that's not very good. So we need to keep on resetting our rhythm by light. Here's some hormones, circadian rhythm of hormones, right? And this goes to show you that our system really does work in a rhythmic fashion. Melatonin secretion starts at night, 9 p.m. Prolactin is secreted early after we go to sleep. Growth hormone, releasing hormone, is secreted. That's important for slow wave sleep. And TRH, that's the thyroid hormones. It starts the cascade. The beginning of the thyroid hormone cascade starts at 3 a.m. about. Metabolism is lowest at 4 a.m. So that's when you can say we're coldest, but we're not up to experience that. Then, before early morning, we have the system that increases blood pressure, push more blood flow throughout the body. The renin-angiotensin system, aldosterone increases. Cortisol spikes at 6 a.m. Aldosterone and cortisol, VIP. All right. Next. Ghrelin continues to okay. Basically, these are a bunch of hormones. Testosterone secretion peaks at about 9 a.m. Leptin, all these hormones that you know about, they have a rhythm to them. And here's a nice picture. See noon, highest alertness at 10, highest testosterone secretion at 9, bowel movement likely at 8:30. I'm going back here. We go to noon, coordination is at 2:30 p.m., 3:30, fastest reaction time, 5 o'clock, greatest cardiovascular efficiency and muscle strength. Actually, if your rhythm is working pretty decent, and you might notice it, for me, subjectively, I notice that I start getting a little jittery, like I need a run or something at about, anywhere between 3:30 and 5 p.m. And this could be the reason why. All right. 2 a.m., we have the deepest sleep. This is another one. We can go past this. Heart attacks often occur in the morning. Seizures peak in the late afternoon. Asthma attacks get worse between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. Blood pressure and heart rate increases in the morning due to cortisol. This is clotting factor, pi1, peaks at around 6:30 a.m. That's probably, the blood pressure and the pi1 are probably why heart attacks occur in the morning. GERD may be higher at night. Stomach acid production peaks between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. How am I on time?
We've got 15 more minutes, and then we'll do questions and answers.
Okay, so I got to go faster.
Don't worry.
Okay. Now, if you read the research, they'll talk about 25% of the genes at least are controlled by the circadian rhythm. But researchers now believe anywhere between 30 and 90%. The 90% comes from a Stanford researcher, top researcher in sleep. He said he thinks it's up to 90%. And so basically, all this talk about epigenetics everything, you can say you're controlled by your rhythm. All the hormones, it's super important. Metabolism, like Mr. Fauch says, it's controlled by your circadian rhythm and your clock genes. Most hormone receptors have rhythms. Clock genes control NAD plus and SIRT1. So Byrne likes to study NAD, and that's controlled by clock genes. Clock genes controls epigenetics through SIRT1, and many variations in these genes cause diabetes. Adrenal fatigue. I don't know if you guys believe it or not, but I think I have a post debunking it where I basically say that it's a circadian rhythm disorder. Basically, there's a whole bunch of events happen, and after your cortisol tanks, guess what? Your suprachiasmatic nucleus, in two different mechanisms, talks to your adrenal glands, and they create cortisol. That's what controls your cortisol rhythm. So if you have a flat rhythm, it means your circadian rhythm is flat, and it can cause a lot of issues. All right. Autophagy, inflammatory responses. Interesting fact, the best time to perform a working memory task tends to be the midday, while immediate memory is best in the morning. Simple processing is ideally performed in the evening. Here are the Zeitgebers. Question is, how do you take care of your circadian rhythm? You build in these Zeitgebers at the proper times. Light is the strongest cue for entrainment. It is not the only factor acting on circadian rhythms, however. Eating schedules, temperature, movement, social interactions, sex, stress, exercise, and other physical activity, when you couple it with light exposure, results in a somewhat stronger entrainment response. So let's say you're jet lagged. You combine exercise with light, your system will be able to adjust much better. Drugs. Viagra is one example. It actually helps you entrain better as well through PDE5 inhibition. And music is another Zeitgeber. But many of the drugs that we have many of the herbs that we have, they're all working on the circadian rhythm in some way. Some of them are very direct, some of them are more indirect, and I'll show you how later on. Here's what we know about light and the circadian rhythm, since it is the most important Zeitgeber. In humans, exposure to light soon after awakening advances the rhythm. When you advance the rhythm, it means, to think about it simply, you wake up a little earlier. Whereas exposure before sleeping delays the rhythm. That's why these people had a 25-hour cycle where they kept on delaying. And a lot of people have that problem, like I said. All right. The length of light exposure influences entrainment. Longer exposures have a greater effect than shorter exposures. Consistent light exposure has a greater effect than intermittent light exposure. In rats, constant light eventually disrupts the cycle to the point that memory and stress coping are impaired. So it can destroy your memory and your ability to tolerate stress. The intensity and the wavelength of light influence entrainment. So dim light can affect entrainment relative to darkness. So even if you have dim light, it can still cause a problem. Brighter light is more effective than dim light. The brighter the light is, the more effective. The light that we have, this light here, this is optimized for the visual system. It's not optimized for circadian functioning. In humans, a lower intensity, short wavelength light appears to be equally as effective as a high intensity of white light. So the wavelength matters too. Now here's the interesting thing. In mice, exposure to dimly lit 5 lux, and you'll see what 5 lux is, as compared to dark, decreased the rhythmic expression in all but one of the core circadian clock genes assessed in the liver. So 5 lux of light was able to cause a problem in these mice. The problem with this area of research, and this may be one reason why it's not more discussed, is because it's hard to do research on this type of question. You have to. I mean, they do some, but the way they do research is on genetics. They look at genes. They do research on shift work, and they do research on animals. And there's not that much clinical trials. There's some, but not enough. So we do have to rely a little more on mice in this area. So let's look at what 5 lux is. We've evolved with 0.0001 lux, moonless, overcast night sky. Moonless, a little more, and then we get to 1 lux maximum on a full moon on a clear night sky. We did not evolve with light. Basically, we're living in an experiment that we don't know what the result is going to be. However, we can look at animal studies, shift workers, and certain genetics and see that disrupting your circadian rhythm is problematic. Now, another interesting thing here is office lighting, 320 to 500 lux. Look at the sun, direct sunlight, 32,000 to 100,000 lux. You're not getting the same strength of the light when you're indoors and when you're outdoors. And even when it's daylight, or even an overcast day, is 1,000 lux. It's double what an office building gets. And I'll explain later why it's not so simple just to get higher lux in an office building. I notice certain things. If I eat something that gives me inflammation, I will get a worse response in the morning. That's when inflammation your immune system is ramped up in certain ways. At 1 to 2 p.m. is when things slow down a bit. And that's what's known as an afternoon dip. Now, I used to get a food coma, but now I'm just, slightly slowed down a bit. From 4 to 6 p.m. every day, I have a surge of physical energy and the need to move and exercise. From 9 to 10:30, I start to get sleepy. And if I stay up till 11 or 12, I'll often get a surge of energy that lasts until 1 to 2 a.m. And so we see that there's rhythmic patterns for these things. How did we evolve? We were outside all day. There's never been a time period in human history where we were not outside. We were, whether we were farmers, hunters, whatever we were outside all day. When it got dark, we slept. We had no artificial lighting, and no one stayed up after dark, even relatively recently. It got dark, people went to sleep. It got cooler at night, right? It gets cooler at night, and we didn't have double-strength covers. No activities were generally done at night except sleep. No eating, no going out, no working, no watching movies, nothing. What do we have now? We have less light in the day, offices indoors, more light at night, light bulbs, screens, computer, laptops, iPads, iPhones, street lamps. More stress at night, right? We're in a 24-hour cycle now. We're generally working all the time, or there's just stresses at all times. People aren't sleeping, so temperature consistency. We control the temperature to be constant, and so we make sure we have covers at night and thick covers. We always have this constant temperature. Eating before bed or when the sun goes down. We eat late, and that we've never done that either. Generally, we're not exercising enough. We skip breakfast. Now, this is something I want to get to because the intermittent fasting is very big on this, skipping breakfast. This is a good thing for... Intermittent fasting is a very healthy thing. I've written a post on it. So I'm not disputing that. What I would dispute is the best time for intermittent fasting. And the way that humans naturally intermittently fasted was they'd stop eating at night. And so if you wanted to intermittent fast, stop eating at 7, start eating at 9, and you fasted for 14 hours. If you want to extend it a little, you could stop at 6 and go to 10. But in general, your rhythm is still going to be up and running. Problem is, when you restrict calories, you're giving your circadian rhythm in the day. If you restrict calories in the day, you're giving it a scrambled signal. Now, since our circadian rhythms are already not that great, it can be argued that, well, we might as well do something really healthy that can protect us in a lot of ways. So that's a different question. We don't eat enough protein in the morning and too much protein at night. Protein increases metabolism. That's why there's many studies that show the more protein you eat, the less you weigh. Protein is very important for metabolism, and you want to increase metabolism in the morning and decrease it at night. That is the way that your rhythm works. So a lot of protein in the morning, and again, you can still do protein restriction. I'm not saying not to restrict protein if you want to do that. If that's, you feel that your system is designed for that. So what you would do is you would eat a lot of protein in the morning. You wake up, you eat a lot of protein, maybe an hour later. You can eat a bit of protein in the afternoon, and you don't eat protein until the next day. You go on a 20-hour protein fast. That's fine. And that will go well with your circadian rhythm. So I think keeping this in mind is very important. This is what happens when your clocks, you have different clocks. One is in your brain, your hypothalamus, and you have clocks in your liver, your intestines, your lungs, everywhere in your body. When they're not aligned, things go wrong. The light is telling you one thing. You start fasting. It's telling your liver something else. It's just, your gut is being told something else. Again, having everything in aligned is much more efficient, much more healthy. Result of circadian disruption. There's actually research on every one of these. Cancer, obesity, diabetes, autoimmunity, gut problems, heart disease, cognitive dysfunction, fatigue, psychiatric disorders, insomnia, anxiety, and depression. Now, the level of evidence is different for each one. For example, the strongest evidence would be for bipolar, right? That's known as a circadian rhythm disorder. But there's evidence for all of these. And I'll go through some of them, but not all of them. And this is a good example, by the way, of something that doesn't depend on whether you are going to belong to the cancer or autoimmune group, because everything is in this group. It's never good if you disrupt your circadian rhythm. I'll give you a couple examples here. 35% of the variance in BMI, exposure to, they found that the average time exposed to 500 lux or more, and again, we're exposed to that because we're getting light at night. Right now we're exposed to 500 lux. Accounted for 35% of the variance of BMI. That's a lot. We talk about what food we're eating, this, that, and the other. 35% of BMI is based on how much light you're getting. And so the important thing to realize over there is not is the number of hours. You want to reduce the number of hours, but you want to get an increased intensity in the morning. Light exposure of different wavelengths in the morning for 2 hours immediately upon waking. Individually, it alters leptin and ghrelin. So we see that light can alter these hunger hormones. There's a mechanism involved here. Exposure to at least 45 minutes of morning light for 3 weeks in obese women resulted in reduced body fat and appetite. We see that it's, when you get the light is also important for BMI. Obese women with both light and exercise, compared to exercise alone, had significantly greater reductions in body fat. So even if you exercise, it's another way to lose weight, having light at the proper times. Glucose is converted primarily into fat during the inactive phase and used for energy and to other tissue building during the high activity phase. So if your rhythm is not working and your liver, your liver is going to convert it to fat, your fat cells, the glucose is going to be converted to fat instead of energy. Animals forcibly jet lag develop metabolic syndrome and obesity even though they eat the same amount of calories. So calories in, calories out. I mean, your metabolism is more important than how many calories you eat, even though calories is obviously a factor. Cognitive function. People who care about cognitive function, if you get jet lagged, your brain doesn't work as well. Well, circadian variations have been found in the efficiency to execute many tasks, such as sensory motor reaction time, time estimation, memory, verbal, arithmetic calculations, simulated driving tasks. Okay, it affects attention, working memory, and executive functions. All the big accidents, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, a bunch of others, happened at night, middle of the night. They were shift workers. Brain is not working in the middle of the night as well as it is in the daytime. Chronic light destroys dopamine neurons in the substantia nigra. Think Parkinson's. When adjusted for various factors, light pollution was associated with Parkinson's. So something you wouldn't think about is associated with light, too much light. So we see that too much light is a problem, and at different times it's a problem. You want to get a good dosage at the right time. This is a quote. When we disrupted the normal day-night light cycles of mice, essentially giving them jet lag, we found that too many Th17 cells developed and accumulated in the intestines. As a result, these mice were more prone to develop an IBD-like disease. Again, whether you get IBD or you just get leaky gut and intestinal inflammation, you don't have to get IBD. That depends on your genetics. But you can still get intestinal inflammation without IBD. Cancer. Cancer is actually a big one. Studies have shown that disrupting circadian rhythms in mice causes tumors to grow faster. And one of the things that the clock does is restrictions on when the cells can divide. Having ever worked permanent or rotating night shift was associated with an increased risk for breast cancer compared to day workers. So even if you just did it for a year, subjects who had worked for at least 1 year in night shift work had 14% higher rate of prostate cancer compared to never night workers. For people who worked at a night shift job for more than 28 years, had a 38% increased risk. I would argue that this would be a lot higher, except that most of us are suffering from chronic jet lag in some form or another. Risks were more pronounced for high-risk tumors. Cardiovascular disease is 40% higher in shift workers. These are the big killers: breast cancer, prostate cancer, heart disease, autoimmune disease. Depression and anxiety. Anxiety and sleep and circadian problems are often correlated. They go together. Shift work was related to a higher prevalence of depressed mood than day work, up to 6 times higher. Animals exposed to constant light got depressed and anxious. Genes involved in anxiety are also involved in circadian rhythms. The dopamine receptor type 2, 5-HT2C, GSK3 beta, and ARNT-L is the circadian gene. Self-decode actually has all these. Bipolar, I didn't want to go into it because it's known as a circadian rhythm disorder. Even something like schizophrenia, there's a gene, a SNAP25 gene. There's a defect, the genetic mutation that triggers schizophrenia-like symptoms in mice also appears to disrupt their circadian rhythm and body clock. There's a defect in the way that the master clock in the SCN is talking to peripheral clocks. It's rather like jet lag, the researcher says. All of the biology is in different phases. Several other illnesses associated with disrupted body clocks as a result of shift work are also particularly common in people with schizophrenia. Cardiovascular disease, adult onset diabetes, obesity, and high cholesterol. And there's a similarity between illnesses, the comorbidities in schizophrenia and circadian rhythm issues. Here's a picture of the website, Self-Decode. This is the SNAP25. We have a bunch of genes. These are the SNPs. They tell you, which ones are having a minor allele. You can read about each one. All right. It's, the circadian rhythm, if you want to get geeky here, critical to metabolism, and that is working through BMAL1 is one circadian gene. It produces PPAR alpha and NAD. The enzyme NAMPT is produced by BMAL1. So we spoke about NAD, Elysium, nicotinamide riboside. BMAL1, the more robust your rhythm, the more BMAL1 you have, the more your metabolism works better. Higher in the daytime, more normalized at night. BMAL1 helps produce basically every hormone, insulin, pregnenolone. So if your rhythm is not robust, you produce lower insulin, lower pregnenolone, lower testosterone, and my clients are low in most of these. They have low insulin often. Some people have high insulin, but those are different phenotype. And then progesterone, estradiol, cortisol, aldosterone. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone, that's for testosterone, precursor. Increases reactive oxygen species if you don't have enough BMAL1. And increases LDL receptors, so it increases your LDL with less BMAL1. Mice without BMAL1 are infertile, small in stature, age quickly, have progressive pain in joints, and are more sleepy and less active. That gives you an idea of what BMAL1 does. Again, it increases NAMPT, and this is important for NAD+ and SIRT1. So these are for the anti-aging folks. This is just SIRT1, PPAR alpha, NRF2, the antioxidant, inhibits mTOR. That's for the anti-aging, rapamycin. Increases hair growth, controls certain kinds of inflammatory myocytes, and these are enzymes that increase gene production. Again, this is just going through, the enzymes. It's increasing the enzymes that are increasing gene production. PGC1 alpha, that's for mitochondrial function and metabolism. Okay, and BMAL. Okay, let's see what else we got here. So light at night decreases BMAL1. Amyloid beta, alcohol, retinol deficiency. That's a vitamin A. If you live by the sun schedule, you're more likely to go to bed. People who camp, the rhythm is normalized. You want to do oxidation in the daytime, exercise, sun, eating, to increase adenosine buildup. How are we doing on time? Huh? Okay. All right. You want to be cool at night, so I guess we're just going to do the circadian rhythm. Supplements in the day, they increase SIRT1, SIRT3, mTOR, the AMPK, PGC1 alpha, PPAR alpha. Supplements generally increase these, so you want to do that in the daytime rather than at night. Acidic beverages in the daytime. My circadian rhythm protocol, and I'll end with that. Upon awakening, you want to get outside and look at sun. You want to eat a protein-rich meal in the day. You need to be outside for however much you can. Ideal is 6 hours. You want to have at least 1 hour full-body sun. Cut out blue and green light at night. There's glasses for that. You want to be in total darkness at night. I mean, it's only feasible to do that right before you go to sleep, so you want to wear these red glasses. Exercise should be in the daytime. Anything that increases your metabolism should be in the daytime. You want to increase your core body. You want to do something that causes a lot of heat in the day. That'll increase your slow wave sleep, whether it's exercise or sauna. Use your brain in the daytime rather than at night. Stop eating completely by 7. Go to bed around the same time is generally a good idea. Go to bed at 9 p.m. Instead, or 10 p.m. instead of 2 a.m. Be cool at night. Ensure adequate intake of calories in the daytime so you don't have to eat at night. Especially protein and carbs and fat you can focus more on the nighttime. All right, make sure your thyroid hormones are normal. Get your stress levels under control because they'll cause you to stay up. And make sure you don't have any source of inflammation because inflammation is the most significant disruptor of your circadian rhythm. Some people say shut off Wi-Fi, but there's no research on that. There's certain research that it can activate certain parts of the nervous system, but that's a different story. Sleep in total darkness, and if you're still having troubles, nicotinamide riboside, these are things that can increase SIRT1, NAD+, nutrients. All right, that's that. So we got up to 3.
Okay, let's take a couple of questions there. We have to wrap up by 10 o'clock, so who's up? Yeah, by 10, exactly.
Hi. Some people claim hyperinsulinemia is the primary source of problems. Do you agree with that or not? Because you didn't list that as one of your, the major
Well, yeah.
thing.
For people who are having weight problems, so the people who have problems losing weight, that's an issue. Not the primary, but it can be an issue. I put it lower down, but it's an issue. Most of my clients who they have low insulin. I've always had low insulin, a lot of health issues, so definitely not true for most people, for a lot of people.
Will these slides be available online somewhere?
They can be, if you want.
That'd be great.
It's all recorded, so about 2 to 3 weeks, 3 to 4, just depending. Just go back to the website. All the video and all the slides are on there. So,
wasn't there a study about leaving your windows open at night and also during the day because it affects your brain? Somehow, I think I remember you talking about this.
That's a number 7 for the toxin part. Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion.
I don't know if you read about this, but just to add to your list, there's a study that just came out looking at resistance to tamoxifen in breast cancer. They were actually able to reduce resistance by having the women sleep in a complete darkness.
That makes sense.
That it substantially decreased the resistance to tamoxifen.
Thank you.
any other questions?
I know you didn't talk about it today, but I was curious from your website about how you use the supplemental oxygen, when and how much.
Supplemental oxygen. Again, you want to use that in the daytime. It's going to increase oxidation, increase metabolism. How much? Studies show about 3 minutes.
3 minutes of some normal flow of some machine that you...
Yeah, an oxygen machine if you
Yeah.
wanted to do that, sure. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I think I have most symptoms of THD dominance. One thing I noticed is alcohol in moderation gets rid of those symptoms, like nasal congestion or those kind of things. They disappear when I use alcohol.
So some people do worse with alcohol for certain reasons, but alcohol is an immunosuppressant in all ways. Like in TH1, TH2, but some people don't detox toxins, so they'll do worse. Alcohol is a toxin, it's a neurotoxin, so it would make sense that you would do worse on it, but if you do better, it could be from inhibiting the immune system in some way, sure.
When you're trying to adjust to jet lag, I know light is obviously one of the key things, and sometimes you try to stay on a schedule. What do you do when you're crossing like a ton of time zones, like
Right.
12, like I have a client who flies from here to Israel, so
Yeah, for that you would want to have some help with pharmacology. So if you don't want, Icarin is a natural PDE5 inhibitor. That in combination with light and exercise, and maybe forskolin for increasing cyclic AMP, that would be a good stack for improving jet lag.
Okay, so we need to wrap it up. We need to be out of here by 10 o'clock, so let's thank Joe for his talk. Our next meeting is September 15th.